for the coverage of the genocide against the Tutsi in 1994, and what sparkled his own interest to cover the genocide 10 years after the genocide. Most welcome to all of you. Bienvenue à tous. Yolande, j'aimerais bien commencer avec vous. Vous portez la voix des rescapés sur ce panel. J'aimerais, Yolande, que vous nous partagiez votre expérience du génocide. Comment est-ce que vous l'avez vécu? Quelle a été votre expérience aussi de la survivance?
C'est vraiment pas facile. Comme l'a dit tout à l'heure Michel Hirsch, raconter le génocide, c'est revivre le génocide. Mais c'est un choix que j'ai fait. C'est un choix que j'ai fait de raconter, toujours raconter. J'ai écrit pour que le livre m'aide à parler là où je ne pourrais jamais arriver, pourvu qu'il y ait des gens qui sachent lire et écrire. Et donc, j'habitais Nyamirabo à Kibiriza. J'avais une famille, mon mari et mes enfants. J'avais mon frère qui était mon voisin. Il était marié, il avait 2 enfants.
Survivors. We're going to talk about this later. As you know, there were lists of the Tutsis. I remember that I kept erasing the number that was inscribed on our door at home, but there was somebody who was doing it. But every time I removed it, somebody would put a number back. Tutsis have always been naive, especially when it comes to their extermination. The process has been there for a very long time. We always think you cannot exterminate a whole population, a whole group. And I hoped that yes, there would be people would die, but not everyone. And the day it started, the blue helmets who were in the neighborhoods were nowhere to be seen. When I think about this, I become upset. There are situations, there are things that could have been done to prevent what happened. So, my husband was killed on the 13th. On the 14th, my children were tortured on the corpse of their father to say where I was. They refused. And they were told, tomorrow we will come and kill you if you don't tell us where your mother is. The next day they come back and they killed my children. And they threw them into a mass grave around where we lived. The father of Specios was in the same grave as my children. Something that stayed with me concerning the Tutsis who were our neighbors, people were desperate. They thought there's nothing that could be done. And they came together and started praying. And when they told me, I told them, no, I don't want to join you. And they said, yeah, join us because nothing is going to save us. And I told them, no, I don't want to die like this. I don't know how I survived. I can't really tell you. If I knew how I survived, I would have done so for my children, not for me. I would have preferred that they be here. They could have been able to do more than I. But it's for the love of my people that today I'm giving a testimony. And that's not all. It also feels sometimes that life chose me home. You're still young. Age is nothing but a number. So your anger came from your will to write. So apart from your desire to say what happened, what did it represent to you to go in the world, around the world? In Belgium, especially the journalists, uh, the the survivors don't want to talk about what happened. Do you know why? That those are journalists asking. These are journalists asking me, and I've answered. How many people are there to listen to me? If I started writing, it's because people did not want to listen. You know that a lot. People usually like stories with happy endings. Stories that end with hope. You know, a movie has to end with something nice. But us, when the genocide was not just a fiction, a story, a legend. It's a reality. It's something that actually happened. Humans killing other humans, Rwandans killing other Rwandans. It was not a foreigner who came to kill in Rwanda. It is our brothers, our sisters, our families who did not want us anymore. But you have to go, but you have to go deeper, and but it's not the time to go into analysis. We'll have time for that. This is what I wanted to tell you. I started writing because people did not want to listen. When it's about horror, they didn't want to listen. Why? It's not my fault. It's not. It's their fault, not mine. But at least they should listen. They should listen to see the results of what they did, and at least protect our future generations. And this is why I started writing. So let's imagine today, if I was wearing the Star of David, the Jew, Jewish people are still are still being are still being killed. So Everything there is war, every time there's war, it's the fault of the Jews. If Tutsis are being killed in Congo, it's the Tutsis' fault again. Today, excuse me to, yeah, so the issue that we have today in Congo, what we have in Congo is due to issues of colonization and foreign countries. They need to have the courage to admit that they were wrong. Everybody can be wrong. But then when you're wrong and you don't admit that you were wrong, it means that you have an agenda. Look at us. We managed to forgive the genocidaires because they had the courage to say mea culpa. Yes, what you said is not wrong. I did it, even if I didn't prepare it. But the government prepared it for me and asked me to execute. I believe today we have issues when it comes to simplicity. When somebody's wrong, he doesn't see it so anymore. When I'm writing, I do not want children, especially Rwandan children, be like those 30 years ago. I want the children of Rwanda to know their history, that they inherit their story, have ownership of their story, and transform the acts of our ancestors, the bad acts, into good acts. Children have to know that we have a nation to build and rebuild. You know, when we were in Belgium, we were talking about having a Hutu land and a Tutsi land. You know, you have to be really stupid to think it that way. I'm sorry to say this, but this is part this is part of the reason why I write. It's for the inheritance of our children, our Rwandan children, but also every other children abroad. And this is why I was spared. My life was spared. This I wanted to be the voice that talks about realities without sugarcoating anything. I know I don't want people to say, "Oh, she talks very nicely." No, 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 no. I say the truth, and if somebody believes that that's not the case, then we can talk and exchange. But our children should not inherit what I lived through. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yolande. Thank you for that strong message. Bubaka, I come to you. Yolande said that she writes, to have her voice heard. Now, you are part of uh, the first team of interpreters, the first team of writers who came to Rwanda after 1994. In 1998, you had a project to testify about the moral solidarity with the Rwandan people and to denounce the silence of Africans. Where did come that awareness of African writers with your project? I'm asking this question to you. What was the motivation of that awareness raising, and what made it possible for that project to come out? And you also build that experience with the writing in residence in Nyamirambo, and I remember your books that you wrote after that experience. Maybe share with us that experience. Thank you, Sandra. Well, the event that has brought us together here is very important, very significant. Thank Her Excellency the First Lady to be present in this event, and I really wish to salute everybody here. Well, Rwanda, writing for the sake of remembrance of, well, that was a project. It was actually stubborn project. It's that is the kind of event whereby we think, why can't we do this or that? Why shouldn't we go to Rwanda to testify, to what has happened there? But the question did not come out of the blue. Actually, Noki should be in the room. Noki Jedanum and Maina Kulibali organized at that time in France, in Lille. Well, they organized a festival, a cinema festival and African literature festival. So we discussed. Then when we met there in 1996, we learned about the execution in a prison in Port Harcourt, an execution of a very popular Nigerian writer. So he was very well known, and he was a friend of some of us, and he was actually hanged with eight of his friends in one of the prisons of Port Harcourt. Why? Well, it was not because of his writings. It was because of his, campaign. His ecological campaign to begin with. He was from the Ogoni people, and he expressed the manner in which his people were treated. It created poverty. So that was I think there was an oil company that was actually, at the basis of that. So he was hanged. He had never preached violence, nothing. So he was hanged. Now we were there. We learned about the information, and we used to say that we were, committed writers. You know, we say that we are very proud of ourselves. We said, well, we are writers. Well, actually, we did not serve anything because uh, apart from our loud speaking, people are being killed. People are being killed, in the open. Writers being killed, and in the country of the Nobel Prize, Wole Soyinka. So we actually made some protests. So we discussed. Then from that time, we from we said, what are we doing? Maimuna and Noki actually took over that question. They said, well, 2 years ago in Rwanda, something happened, something exceptionally serious, and no one amongst us has ever spoken about that. That was not true because I had already talked about it, but I talked about it, but not well because I did not understand what happened. Actually, I got some confusion in my. I made a confusion in my book regarding the victims and the uh, the the killers. So now I said, why shouldn't we go to Rwanda and fi- finally come up with this testimony of solidarity, compassion, just as in a family, in an African family, when when somebody has lost their relatives, so you need to go there and mourn with them. So you testify with your writing, and that was very important in our contract because this was amongst us as friends with Noki and Maimuna. So they said you are not obliged to write down. You go there. If you want, you go there, you testify, you write down. If you really think that you don't have the strength to write, well, that's okay. Don't write anything. So everybody has written. What does it mean? It means that when we live out such events and you are a writer, you want to speak about it and to speak to the world. And we did it. What was, well, just a small question became actually a huge event, actually a mark in history. That was a turn in the African literature. So today, we can say that Rwanda, écrit par de mémoire, our books are being, taught in schools, are studied, and some people even criticize or critique our work. I remember there was an article that was written about that event. You know, well, well, that was actually that was marginal as a criticism, but people understood the stakes, you know, the political stakes, and because even beyond the literature, you know, with this project now, won't be long, as, al- as always. Well, well, I can tell you that this was really, you know, something that struck my life because I really talk about it, you know, at length. Y- You know, I have a life before Rwanda and the life after Rwanda, and all my writings. So most people identify me with the book Murambi, Le Livre des Ossements. And I tried because I became completely ignorant. I'm not proud to say that, but I want to say that, well, I have to be honest and, you know, recognize it. I didn't know anything before that. That I came. I came to Rwanda 4 years after the genocide, and I didn't understand anything. And I understood that I had not understood anything. So when with this new writing, with this book, I I began to learn as much as possible, you know, about what happened in Rwanda. And in reality, for the last 30 years, intellectually speaking, I am still learning, trying to understand what happened in 1994 in Rwanda. And I, you know, from 1994 to 1998, I had not yet understood anything while I was thinking that I was a committed writer. Thank you, Baka.
To you as we are talking about ignorance, but it can also be related to disinterest, the lack of interest for such a big event of the historical event as the genocide against the Tutsi. And I wanted to see with you, it has been highlighted at several times that um, African media uh, has demonstrated lack of interest uh, in relation to the genocide against the Tutsi. And, it has also been said several times that, all, the media had all their eyes on the South African situation, which was South Africa was going through historical times as well in 1994. And it has been highlighted several times that media was there. And it can be the reason why there was that lack of interest about the genocide against the Tutsi. How did you get to know about Rwanda and the history of the genocide against the Tutsi? What has been the media coverage of the genocide also in Africa in general, in South Africa in particular? Is it something that happened or not at all? I really wanted to relate the two, that ignorance, the writers, but also that lack of interest, and get a perspective from you as a journalist. How,
Yeah.
yeah.
I've often thought about this over the past 30 years. If we take my own decision making specifically as a jump off point for trying to understand how the media initially reacted to news of large scale killings coming out of Rwanda uh, in April 1994. So I was the correspondent in Johannesburg for New York Newsday at the time. You have to remember the context of that time. The Berlin Wall had fallen. People were writing books about the end of history. Communism had collapsed. Mandela walked out of prison. That was a seismic event globally. Everybody who was already a young adult at that time at least knew where they were when Mandela walked out of prison. So there was this sense of the world is heading in a decisively more positive direction. We knew apartheid was going to crash now. And so New York Newsday at the time did not have any bureau in Africa. So I was sent to Johannesburg in April 1992 to go open Africa Bureau and create the infrastructure for covering the process that led to the end of apartheid. So now this was an obsession of mine at the time. If you are an African of a certain age, at least growing up in metropolitan Africa, South Africa was your obsession because it was the last bastion of white rule on our continent. So whether you were in university or you were a young journalist and so on, we were all very agitated by the desire to see the end of apartheid in South Africa. So when this was now finally happening, election date had been set for April 27, and the campaigns were in high gear. I was completely obsessed about covering this whole process at the time. And then from about April 8, overnight, April 7, April 8, there were a few very insignificant, very brief wire reports by Reuters or Associated Press saying there may have been some killings that started last night in Kigali. Now, we are about to taste victory. And I'm talking not so much as a journalist, but as an African growing up on this continent, seeing the end of apartheid, we're seeing the finish line. The tendency was either to ignore or to minimize a terrible story that was happening somewhere around the Great Lakes when Africa's glory day was just about to manifest itself, right? So I was also the only one covering the entire continent at the time for New York Newsday, and therefore I stood with the South Africa story. I wanted to see Mandela vote on April 27 just for my own life's experience, as well as to witness his swearing in on May the 10th. So even though in subsequent days, as we moved into the middle of April and late April, it was now clear that something significant was going on, I held on until the 10th of May, when Mandela was sworn in as South Africa's first democratically elected president, before I jumped on the plane and came to Rwanda for the first time to start covering the genocide. By this time, the genocide was about 5 weeks into its span of roughly 100 days, I think it took before the RPF finally surged into Kigali and put an end to the mass killings. So it was, at least in my case, and I suspect for most people for various reasons, we preferred this story of human transcendence, of this extraordinary story of triumph. I think my sister was mentioning something about people preferred happy endings. That was clearly a story of a happy ending. We wanted that story. And so, to me, I think in looking back the last 30 years, that was probably the decisive factor. The other thing to consider was the stereotypical image of Africa was where bad things happened, where, you know, children with flies around their noses, the Biafra War created the, you know, classic images of the starving African child and so on. So this was always kind of the stereotypical, and I'd covered Somalia's farming 3 years before, 1991 into 1992. So all of these things had some impact, even if unconsciously, on the desire to quickly and decisively come and tell the world about what was happening in Rwanda. And so not long after I came and saw a country that was nearly just silent. It's like you couldn't hear dogs barking, you couldn't hear birds crowing. It was a frightening necropolis that I met in this city of Kigali in May 1994 when I first came here. And then a couple of weeks or so later, standing at the border in Gisenyi, the border with Goma, and over 48 hours, witnessing physically 2 million people surging across into Congo from Rwanda. It was the most extraordinary thing that once you've seen it, you cannot unsee it. And so that became almost a journey of obsession for me since then, partly out of guilt. Guilt in the sense that I knew I did have some skills, some talents for storytelling, and I could not shake the feeling, even if it was a little bit egotistic, that if one had covered insistently the beginnings of the genocide, we might have trapped the world powers, especially the United States government, into taking action earlier, and rather than wait until nearly 1 million people had been killed almost one by one with machetes and by other means. And so because of that experience, I have never been able to stay away from Rwanda for the last 30 years.
Right.
And we can talk about some of the other aspects as you go.
Yeah, of course. We'll come back to that, Dele, and thank you so much for sharing. And speaking of international opinion, Jean-François, j'aimerais bien me tourner vers vous cette fois-ci. Et,
I would like to turn to you. You are a big journalist, and from the beginning of the 90s, you sounded the alarm around the genocide against the Tutsi. Now, tell me, what has been the international opinion on the genocide? The French media delayed to acknowledge, the genocidal character of the massacres. What was the situation at that time? What was the reaction of the media in France, and even after the genocide? What is your perspective regarding that? Thank you for your questions. They are very pertinent, and to answer, for in 15 minutes. Well, I don't know whether I'm going to make it, but I'm going to try to make it so that everybody will have time to respond. Well, I wish to tell you that I'm honored with this invitation to come, and I wish to thank Her Excellency, the First Lady, and I thank Minister Bizimana, who has become my friend, and he has spoken very kind words towards me. And I would like to, for the first time, to make public, homage to my wife, Eugenie, who is a Rwandan. She is my wife for the last 51 years. And she helps me a lot in my work, on the genocide against the Tutsi. And she never talks about it, but she helps me a lot. I was surprised by, the title of this panel, where I read journalists, activists, fighting denial of the genocide against the Tutsi. I don't know how to qualify it. Well, my own definition of journalism. Journalism is a journalist is that is my definition. It's not anybody else's. A journalist is a person who gave himself a mission to 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 see the facts that need to be made known to the public. Facts that are verified and that are worthy to be announced to the public. What does it mean? It means that a journalist is not a statute. It's not because you don't have a press card that you are not a journalist. A journalist, it's a spirit, it's a mind, it's a mind. If I think everybody here is a journalist, but we cannot say that this is a meeting of journalists. This is Kwibuka30. Now, the work of a journalist, how can you feel about denial? Denial is the enemy of the truth. So a journalist, according to me, a journalist will consider the one who denies the genocide as an enemy. So you cannot discuss with a denier, because what he says is not coherent. I remember I was in Paris at the Shoah Memorial, and I was one of the moderator in one of the documentaries, and I think you are going to watch that documentary on Sunday on the French television. That is, according to me, the best documentary that has ever been produced on the genocide against the Tutsi, and that provides an explanation of the genocide. When I watched that documentary, somebody said that we don't see Mr. Verdrin who says something in this documentary. But you cannot discuss with Mr. Vedrin and some people who are like him. Just imagine you have a documentary on Nazism, and you think you have to invite neo-Nazis people who said that they are the Jews who actually fought against the elected people of Germany. So that is the same with the Tutsi genocide. You don't discuss with the negationists or the deniers. So let me share with you about my experience in the Great Lakes region. In France, the military service was mandatory, and didn't want to do that military service, so I requested to be sent to Mongolia. So they sent me to Burundi instead of Mongolia, as according to my request. So I spent 2 years of my life from 1971 to 1973. I was in Bujumbura, and I believe most of you understand what happened in that country. So all the events of Burundi, all the events of Rwanda. So I was struck by what I saw, and I felt obliged to look for an explanation, to understand. That actually refocused my life. When I went back to France, of course, as a journalist, I wanted to express what I had felt and what I thought, but no one was interested. We had actually we had a book writing project with Jean-Pierre Chrétien, but nobody was interested. I want Later on, I applied for a job in l'événement du jeudi so that I could share my story. Well, my colleagues used to say, "Well, this guy, keeps talking about Africa," so they accepted me finally. So there's an event that took place, and those are the massacres of Ntega and Marangara on the 15th of August in 1988. If you don't know what happened, those are peasants, Burundian peasants, in the two communes that are neighboring of Rwanda. So those are actually neighboring communes of Rwanda. They rebelled against the authorities, and they killed a few Tutsis, and the army intervened and killed between 10 and 20,000 people. They did not make any difference. And the president of Burundi, Pierre Buyoya, according to me, was he, he was he looked at the situation in his country, and just like the at the end of the massacres in 1972, there was actually there was something of an apartheid. So he tried to correct the situation. I went to interview him, and I told him, I asked him, what were you doing? So that it failed up to 1993. But I came to Rwanda in the same year, and I realized that people were actually fed up. They were fed up against the authorities. We talked, we talk about it openly in bars. I remember once I was in Kigali with friends. They said, "Who is going to actually take away Habyarimana from us?" Well, I told them, "Look, you cannot." I felt something was happening. So I wrote an article in L'Événement du Jeudi, and it was published in September 1988. So I talked about the threat of genocide. So that's what exactly I wrote. Tomorrow, if the bloodthirsty people who want to carry out ethnic cleansing, we shall see a genocide like the one that we saw in Cambodia. I repeated that expression in L'Événement du Jeudi a few years later. That was on the 1st July 1992. This is the article. Maybe you cannot see it, but I will show you after the discussion. So the title was France helping fascists in Africa. So that was the title. Actually, so you know, uh, so I was actually the chief editor. So I made this title, France helping fascists in Africa. That was on the 25th of July 1992. So all those who know the region in France, there were very few. Very few people knew about this region. I was maybe the only journalist. Others were just academics. So I could see what was happening, or what was being prepared, and we sent messages. Jean-Pierre Chrétien did, and some other people did. Why those messages were not understood or heard? Why people like Carbona were not heard? Why the alarms of General Varé were not heard? Why the alarms of Colonel Galinier, who said that the army and the gendarmerie in Rwanda were ready to massacre people? So they were not heard because no one wanted to hear them. They didn't want to hear them because of a mix of indifference and racism. Racism is a key of much of the tragedy. Racism in the Elysee. When Francois Mitterrand said that in those countries there is a genocide, that was not important for him. That is pure racism. When he told Vedrine, if there is an article titled that Hutu and Tutsis, each one their country, well, that is racism, obviously. You know, racism is a very, very slow poison. Yeah. You know, the small French soldier in Kigali in October 1993, who was actually taking Tutsis out of the buses, and so he was a racist. So for him, he Colonel Ponce, who was the head of the Amaryllis operation. Remember when they took the expatriates from Kigali while leaving the Tutsi being massacred? The minister, Alain Juppé, he was the Minister of Foreign Affairs. He said, at least you will save the Tutsi employees in the embassies. So they didn't do it because it was racism. So racism does not need any order. The racism is there. So that is the ideology. That's why it is successful from the 16th century. That's the issue. And it is well explained in the book of my friend Bernard Maguin. He said the Bruguière investigation that proved that the authors of the accident were only high-ranking officers of the APR. That is actually racism. That means you just keep blind before the reality. So, well, if we want to fight against denial, we need to start fighting racism, because racism is everywhere. Uh, it it goes, through uh, any entry. So you cannot discuss with the deniers, and we have to struck the basis of denial, that is racism.
Parlant de racisme justement et de négation.
Speaking of racism and denial, could you tell us about the current situation? What are the challenges in the French media? We are hearing new voices, journalists who go into negationism and who go into denial. So how do we work on limiting these voices? What's changed is that racism is all over the world. We talk about the United States most of the time, but actually in France, racism is increasing. And there was an opinion poll in France where 35% of French are worried about immigrants, where basically they are saying that they are racist. They are much more than 35%, but there is a rise of identity manipulation. And these identity manipulation led to the genocide against the Tutsi. It wasn't only here. This is a universal tragedy. The universality of this tragedy is racism. I try to explain this to my friends in France, but they don't understand. I have a friend who told me some time ago, is it true that black people move from one tree to another like Tarzan? And then I brought her back a picture of Kigali to tell her that that's not the case. You know, something exotic is also our enemy. There's nothing exotic about that. If you like men and you want to understand them, this is the case everywhere. When I do conferences in France and I tell them how Rwanda is very complicated. A man who doesn't have a bicycle dreams of a bicycle. And then once he has it, he dreams of a moped. And once he has that, he wants a car. It's very different back home. Andrew?
Around these very interesting questions about the reactions of being writers, but also journalists in general about the genocide against the Tutsi. And to start, I'd just like to start with sharing with us your experience with the genocide against the Tutsi. Where were you, and how was it to actually live that moment from far? And also, you know, when have you started to feel the urge to write about the genocide against the Tutsi?
Firstly, it's an absolute pleasure to be here, and my thanks to the First Lady and to everyone who's come today. I mean, this morning I woke up, I first arrived in this country as an innocent guerrilla spotter back in 1991, and as I woke up this morning, looking at the Kigali sky, I was somewhat reminded, it's a strange first thought to have in your day, of the words of Adolf Hitler. Just before he invaded Poland, he told a gathering in late August 1939, who, after all, this is 24 years after the event, 24 years after the event, and Hitler told his entourage, who, after all, still talks about the extermination of the Armenians. And here we are today, 30 years after the genocide against the Tutsi, and we are talking, and we are thinking, and we are writing, and we are making more programs, excellent programs, and we won't stop doing that. So people know, and humanity hopefully can learn the lessons. So it was a strange first thought, but, and did I think in 1991, when I was trekking through the Virunga, trying to find a gorilla which didn't want to be found, that I'd be sitting here all this time later on a stage? No, I didn't. And it's been interesting actually today with the makeup of the panels and with so many in the audience, some I know, many I don't. We're all here for our different reasons. And it makes me wonder what it is that makes us come back and talk and makes us want to write and to share knowledge. What is it within us? Is it a sense of justice? It's a sense of a need for forgiveness? We all have our own motivations. What I feel is a little unique on the stage today is being the sole Brit. I know we've had Brexit, but we seem to divorce ourselves from reality as well as the rest of Europe. That's the British problem. But when I first came to research, it was through university studies. And I realized from the UK point of view, there was nothing in the university libraries. This was before the internet had really taken off. There was no information about this event. 1 million people had died, and there was no one in the UK who seemed to know anything about it. There were no resources. There was certainly no education. No one at school was taught about it. It had disappeared. And this was only a few years, 4 or 5 years after this event. And so I had to go to France to find out any information, and the much late lamented Sharon Couteau at Servie took me under her wing. And so many kind people, many I see here today in Rwanda, gave me their time as I started to write and to work on the subject. Perhaps as I've gone on, my direction has changed a little. And what the panel said this morning I thought was very interesting about the silence. So much, we've heard this word silence a lot. And just, if you bear with me for 1 minute, I'll give you a story just from recently, some recent research I'm doing over in Germany into a Holocaust perpetrator, a man called Herbert Lang, a young man, he was only in his 30s. And he was also the commandant of Kulmhof death camp. This was the very first extermination camp in Poland that killed around 160,000. This particular commandant also took part in the euthanasia program, so he'd drive his van around Poland and empty mental hospitals into his gas van. I wanted to find out some more, so I wrote to his former town where he grew up to see if they could find any records on him. And I went to visit them. And amazingly, there were his school records there. And he was in the same class as another boy who turned out to be one of the main resistors to Hitler. So in the same class, 2 people who took the opposite path. And I found where he lived, Herbert Lang. And by coincidence, it's a town museum. And the town museum, you go in and it has lots of details of all the residents of the house and who's lived there over 500 years. But was there any mention at all of Herbert Lang? Nothing. In fact, the archivist had never heard of him. Silence. And yet, his classmate who led the resistance has a school named after him in the town and has a street named after him, has a big memorial stone, a big part in the cemetery. So the resistor is known, is talked about very proudly, but history has edited the man who killed 200,000 individuals. And it strikes me in the UK, that is what we have done. We have edited out the perpetrators. We are a nation of 70,000 people, and if you can find 100 who know the name Bagasora, I would be surprised. Zengyumva, Bizimungu, Bizimana, none are known. And of course, for genocide deniers, this is wonderful. What they love is in a big empty space. If there's no perpetrator, then there's no crime. So for me, for the work I've been doing for the last 10 years, my last book, it's about bringing the perpetrators back center stage. Because I'm fed up in the UK of constantly talking, when people mention Rwanda, it's always about President Kagame, which unfortunately is not in a good way. They have forgotten the crime that took place and the criminals who were center stage. And I think it's putting them back, because I found it's the one thing deniers don't want to talk about. It's the perpetrators. So Alain and Servie and FIDH and so many wonderful people in France, and Eric in Brussels, and they're center stage there. But in the UK, in the US, in Australia, in the Commonwealth nations, they've been forgotten. They've been edited out. It's like Herbert Lang, they don't exist. So for me, let's put them back center stage where they belong. They are responsible for what happened here, and we almost have a responsibility to talk about them as well, to bring them back onto that stage where they don't want to be.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing. I can see that Dele has a point to share on that one.
Yeah, I was just reflecting on some of the things I'd heard from this stage, and what brought me back in 2004, around the 10th anniversary of the genocide. I was the foreign editor of the paper in New York, and I assigned myself the story of re-examining Rwanda 10 years after the genocide, for the simple reason that I thought that memory is a very tricky thing, and it withers and it decays over time. And if we are staying at 10,000 feet and talking about leaders and who did what and who resisted what, eventually it becomes almost like an academic argument. So I made it my mission in 2004 to come down to the ground level, to write about individuals one by one. Conceptually, I knew that 10 years at least gave us a bit of perspective to see a few things more clearly that may not have been visible to us at the time that the genocide itself was being perpetrated. And that to tell these stories, it has to be through these identifiable people. So if I want to write about how does a country come back from the dead, how does it put itself back together again, the instrument I used for that was this young woman who was gang raped repeatedly during the genocide, and whose son that she bore from that encounter was at that time in 2004, a 9-year-old boy. And to examine the relationship between the two of them as a way of understanding and how they managed it together, as a way of understanding how Rwanda itself is trying to stitch itself back together again. And so if I wanted to write about the impossibility of justice when you have a perfect crime such as occurred here, then I go to the people who are struggling to make sense of how to build a life with the neighbors who had wiped out their families, and use that to look at the justice system. And by perfect crime, we mean that if a crime was so extraordinarily successful in its objective and included the large majority of the population, then is justice actually possible anymore in such a situation? I remember Rwanda had, or perhaps still has, a death penalty for murder. But if maybe 6 or 7 million of a population of 8 or 9 million, either directly or indirectly participated in mass murder, how do you impose that judgment? So people have to look for other ways in order to find a future for themselves. So I felt that an effective way of exploring this was not to talk to President Kagame at that time, even though I've talked to him many times before, or to talk to a governor and so on. I think the most senior official I spoke to at the time, actually, was a man I ran into at lunch today for the first time in 20 years, Tom Ndairo, who used to run the Human Rights Commission, right? I just deliberately stayed away from high officials in order to tell the stories from the ground level, because that's what sticks in the mind. So it occurs to me years later that what I was trying to do was to find a way to make the crime stick in the minds of the public by putting specific faces and names and the everyday struggles that people engage in order to survive. And perhaps also to solve some of my own feelings of guilt that I didn't get to this early enough when the genocide began, and I only got to Rwanda in May of 1994. But a new feature is being built here, and you will find a constant struggle between memory and forgetting. I think Milan Kundera was the one who memorably explored that concept. And if people cannot remember things clearly, then there is always the possibility that never again becomes again and again and again.
Yeah.
So it is important to remember what
Yeah,
happened.
absolutely. I agree with you, Dele. I'll let you come back to that as we conclude after going to the audience, which we'll do in 1 minute. Boubacar, did you have a point? No. If not, I'm proposing that we open the floor to the audience for whoever would have insights to share. We'll take maybe 20 minutes for that, and then we come back to the panel for conclusion. So I'm seeing Jean Damascene Gassanavo on the left side of the room. Feel free to raise up your hands. Yes, Damas, you can go ahead as we wait for other people to manifest. Take the floor, please.
Merci beaucoup pour la parole. Tout à l'heure,
Thank you for the floor. When we were launching the book earlier, someone asked, who are you talking to when you say, hear us, entendons-nous? The answer was, we're talking to the whole of humanity. And earlier, Yolande said, I would like the genocide against the Tutsi to be taught to the children. And then I thought to myself, this genocide that was committed here should be taught in all the schools in Africa. The young Africans must know the story. Earlier, Boris was saying that when an African family loses someone, the neighbors come to present their condolences. I believe this would be a way for Africans to present their condolences to Rwanda by teaching the genocide against the Tutsi. It's possible. Is there a political will to do so? That's another question. I know that today there are initiatives at the Maison de l'Université at the University of Rwanda. It's possible for universities in Africa to teach this story, not the story of the genocide, but all the genocides. These young people should know. And when you look at the situation in certain countries, I mean, let's start with our neighbors. These young people, the youth of Africa, must know the story, know what happened, so that tomorrow, because they are the ones who are going to be the elites of tomorrow, they have to know what happened so that the same mistakes are not repeated. I wanted to insist on the importance of education, teaching the genocide, teaching about the genocide against the Tutsi. There are things with, so, in education, you have the person who is learning, you have the content of what you're giving, and then you have the teacher himself. How is he trained? I had the opportunity to participate in Itorero here in Rwanda a few years back, and we had 1,600 teachers from the country who were present, and some of us were telling us that when we get to the chapter on the genocide against the Tutsis, I skip it. And then we ask him, but you're Rwandan? Yes. So why aren't you teaching this? Why aren't you teaching the story in your classroom? And he answered, I'm not capable of doing so. So what do you do instead? Well, I asked a colleague to teach this particular chapter. I believe that our teachers must also be trained on this issue because it's very important. Whether we go through Itorero or other avenues, but they should also be trained here, yes, but also in Africa. Thank you. Thank you, Damas, on your contribution on education, on the story of the genocide. This morning, And this afternoon, we talked about what we have accomplished. I I think that we should also talk about the way forward. You should tell us these are your strengths, these are your weaknesses. This is what I've done in 30 years. So, what can we do more? Is there still something to do? We need, we need, you have the support of outside governments. So you should maybe tell us what are the main areas on which we should work on. What's the way forward? Thank you, Honorable Ambassador. Thank you, Shenge. So I am going to approach this in the same, more or less the same sense as Antoine. Um, the members of the panel mostly talked about the history. I would like to come back to the lessons learned. Genocide was perpetrated. Denial is now present. We have we have other voices who are fighting against this denial. So I would start with the environment in which we live. If you look at the regional and international level, have we evolved? Was the genocide against the Tutsi a lesson to change, a lesson for change? And since we have on the panel people who are from abroad, if we look at what's happening in the neighboring countries, if you look at what's happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo, with the hate speech, the genocide approach that is taking root, can we say that the world has evolved positively? Are there any actions that we could undertake to change this? That's one. But if we even go further, if we look at the international level, at the United Nations or international community, aren't we seeing repetition of what happened in 1994? Are the United Nations who are in Congo, how do they interpret the the genocide action that is ongoing in that country? How do they draft their reports? The UN people who are in Congo, and even the African Union. I can throw the same question to the African Union. So the question I'm asking, this concept of never again, can is is it an actual thing, or are we developing something? Is a similar situation developing in Congo? Because what is happening there, it's not quite different than what's happened in Rwanda. So I would like the panel to suggest avenues of change, because so if we look at what's actually happening right now, it's not the case.
Allô, merci. Alors, à l'instar de tous les intervenants,
So
je voulais saluer également la présence de
I would also like to recognize the presence of the First Lady. And I would like to go further and said on 25th June 2000, when we adopted our 10
vous êtes
books,
l'artiste qui, pour bien, c'est nous
When we adapted the books for theater, we asked that a question: are Rwandans going to read the books that we wrote? In Rwanda and in other African countries, we all know our relationship with reading. So we thought, let's do a play rather. So we had this crazy idea to adapt those 10 books into one play, and we presented that in Kigali and in Butare. And the First Lady had come to Butare to watch this play. This is just to say that all the work that we do, we need empathy and political will. So, what is interesting for me this morning, ask myself the question: the African. I asked myself, where is Africa? Because all the interventions we had come from Brussels, from France, the associations and lawyers. But Africa is not represented, I believe. Boubacar Diop, when he took the floor, said that he didn't know anything about Rwanda before 1994. All of us, actually. We are Africans, and we have to recognize that the genocide against the Tutsi happened on the African continent. Jean Damascene said, we have to work on Africa. Being here in Rwanda, I was here 1 month ago and I came back, and we asked ourselves a question with our Central African friends. And we said, why don't we do a commemoration on this genocide back in Central African Republic? You know, a lot of people ask me, what are you doing in Rwanda? And I want to understand. So in the week of the 22nd April, and we're going to talk about this in schools, because a lot of young pupils who confuse conflicts with genocide. So we're going to go to Cameroon, Togo, Benin, and other countries. So the African, I'm not going to go into too much details on the project. When we were in Rwanda in 1998, we went to the Byumba College. We went to we showed the African map, and then we showed them where we come from, and the children asked us, so you really are African? And you come 4 years after the genocide to see us? We didn't have anything to answer to that. We did not have an answer. In that classroom, we did not have an answer. I come from Chad, where we have civil wars. We've had civil wars for the last 40 years. And some people might think that the RPF was another rebel group. So with all the information, I've learned a lot for the past few years now. And now I'm going to go back in my country and other African countries in order to fight denial of the genocide and educate those who don't understand. And to conclude, I would like to say that we have to continue asking ourselves how important is solidarity as Africans. And from the memory of the genocide, we're here to talk about. Rwanda has changed so much. Rwanda is a model that we should also export in our respective countries. And this is what I'm trying to do with my friends. Thank you very much.
Thierry Gatete.
Thierry Gatete, then we move to the left.
Cela fait tellement longtemps qu'on m'appelle.
Well, it's been a long time I'm not called that name.
Oui.
I'm called Gatete. Thank you. There is a Kinyarwanda proverb that says that, any rain will stop one time. So the Tutsis are like rain that will not stop. It could go, it's been maybe 65 years, you know. Tutsis are being killed in this region. When Gasana said that we need to teach genocide, yes, he's right, but we don't teach the genocide against the Tutsis as history, but this is a current issue. You know, well, the genocide against the Tutsis in Rwanda was stopped, but the genocide against the Tutsis in the DRC continues. We are here talking about the genocide against the Tutsis in Rwanda because it is well known. But once we have established that it was genocide, people should actually be protected. When you talk about Shoah, it is not relative. When you speak amiss a word, then you are really, considered as an anti-Semitist, and people come against you. So we have politicians who uh, who incite hatred against the Tutsis without any consequences. So why is it so? Because the genocide against the Tutsis is being considered as relative. Well, somebody said, one colleague told me that, someone was writing an article titled Genocide and Cholera. What does it mean? It means people killed Tutsis in Rwanda, and those same people were being, were dying of cholera in Mugunga. He would he could have written on the genocide against the Tutsis, but he established that parallelism to just make it something relative. So when we talk about the genocide against the Tutsis, it should not stop there. They invent something else. They say, well, yes, well, but Rwanda has become a dictatorship, but Hutus also have been killed, but and so maybe we would we need to draft a manual or handbook on the genocide. Maybe we should tell people what is not acceptable to do. Now, to conclude, I would like to ask, I can see most of people here, we are like the civil society represented here. Maybe we should, when we should actually publish a declaration, of wishes, because that is our duty. So that when we leave this room, we have Rwandans, we have, people from different countries. Maybe we need to sign a document so that young people who are not invited today, and I wonder why they were not invited, so that they may know that what has been said here at year 30, this is what you have agreed on. Because if the issue of the massacres against the Tutsis is not well known beyond this region, well, after 30 years, we can, commemorate another genocide against the Tutsis, while another genocide is being commemorated here. So we need to find a solution to this issue, because that reign that has no end, so that it should end one day. Thank you, Thierry.
Cette belle idée.
Thank you for that great idea. Now we move to the left. Maybe the ushers, please help us. The Honorable Minister Sandrine, then Mr. Tom Dahiro, and we will move on. Thank you. I thank the speakers. I wish to talk about what the importance of education for young people, because our ministry, the Ministry of Culture and Arts, we organized in Itorero with Ministry of Unity. We had 300 young people representing all the spheres of life in Rwanda. So, we even have some refugees. We have children, young people who are actually children of genocide perpetrators and survivors. So the some of these children were adopted after the genocide against the Tutsis. So I would like to share this experience because with the Itorero, what we realize is that we are responding to the different, major issues. First of all, we have the issue of mental health. After the genocide, those who were young, they still have the trauma because that culture of silence, people do not speak or express themselves loudly. That should not continue. Another element that is important is the issue of education. We need to know what has happened. Well, today, the young people have no complex like the generations before them. So uh, uh, today we don't judge people. We leave people express themselves. They ask questions that they want to ask. And actually we need to go beyond that culture of silence. These young people want to understand what happened during the genocide. Uh, so I think they can be a good relay for that flame, so that they can. Yes, of course we have the pain of the survivors, but there's also pain for the children of the perpetrators who actually still have that load on their shoulders. So I think we need to really focus on the young people in our country, even in Africa, so that we can really help to come up with generation free. They need to understand what has happened. So we need to translate all this knowledge, all these articles that have been drafted, because today people are not learning as we used to learn. So we need to translate all that knowledge because these young people, have a strong desire to learn from what has happened. They also have the trust that they can, achieve more. So I think this is a major, major aspect that we need really to focus on and support the young people. Thank you, Honorable Sandrine, for that perspective on the young people. Mr. Nairo, thank you.
When Dipakier spoke about denial, indifference, and racism, I thought about something which was written 14, 15 years ago in a book by Jean-Marie Vianney Ndagijimana in France, a country where production of literature of denial and justifying genocide is rampant. In that book, he makes a threat that if double genocide is not recognized, he says, and I quote, if the international community is not vigilant, risks driving the Rwandan people into a new apocalypse that will make the genocide of 1994 seem like a road accident. Take note, whenever these ideologues mention about Rwandan people, they mean Hutu. Imagine if over 1 million deaths in 100 days, or over 10,000 Tutsis' lives lost daily, get relegated to a mere road accident. How many does the author think should have died or will be killed in his prophecy of doom? Ndagijimana's analogy, likening the genocide to a mere road accident, is not only profoundly insensitive of the magnitude of the atrocities committed, to suggest that the systematic slaughter of over 1 million people could be relegated to a realm of happenstance is to grossly trivialize the pain and suffering endured by the victim and survivors. It is a statement, please take note, that not only fails to acknowledge the horrors of the past, but also absolves the perpetrators of the heinous crime. Can he write? Do you think he can write the same about the Holocaust? This is a question for the panel and
Thank
everyone
you.
around here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Storm. So we have a last person there on the right, and then.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you. I would like to thank all the panelists. That has been very rich. But I have a question. It's a curiosity question. I want to ask Mr. Dupaquier because he's the one who said it. You said that we don't discuss with the deniers. Well, it's a bit worrisome for me because I live in a country where deniers, are mushrooming. We do whatever we can. They can't listen. Maybe it is true. It is because they don't listen that we cannot discuss with them. But what can we do instead? In all countries of the world, including Rwanda, we realize that the laws against the genocide come at the fourth phase of the genocide. So people don't listen. And the laws are extremely shy to punish them. If we don't discuss with them, if we don't do what we are supposed to be doing, because we say that whenever you push a nail on the same head, it will disappear. So they don't know that there is another truth. So they learn. Let me give you an example. I published a book, Rwanda, 1994, Les Angoisses d'Adélaïde, which is a book I wrote, and I talked about rape, which has been the subject of the discussions this morning. So somebody told me, just look at this man who writes about the rape of a woman, has never been raped, and he will never be raped. And that has been the subject of discussions among the deniers in Canada. Wherever I go, they say, well, that is the man who has been raped. Because I said, no, they just actually try to deny the rape. So just, Mr. Dupaquier, what can we do, when we cannot discuss with those people? Thank you. Well, I can see a last person who wants to say something. Well, because no woman has ever said, but there's a lady who wants to say something. Please give her a microphone.
Thank you very much. I thank Her Excellency the First Lady. I want to say this to the researchers and writers. I want to add this to your message and the information you have already. I would like to comfort people, the survivors of the genocide against the Tutsis. It's been a long journey, and it started when genocide was committed here, and then it was transposed to the Congo. You've mentioned Gachacha, and we've learned all that. Those who evade justice, those who refuse to tell the truth. And after all that, we've seen that genocide survivors, and after all this journey, they are still being hurt by hate speech and genocide ideologues, but they stand up, they stand strong, and we are with them, we support them. So all of us together fight those deniers. I was kind of summarizing all the panels we've heard. The media and the so-called researchers sometimes tell the wrong story about us. They tell the wrong history. They say double genocide. And we keep saying this. We did not suffer any genocide in the forest of the Congo. We were returned here by Inghotanyi soldiers who rescued us like they did, rescuing those who were being killed during the genocide. The Inghotanyi did not discriminate. They came to the Congo and they paid the ultimate price. They even brought the airplanes. We were in Kisangani in the forests. They brought us back, put us back in schools, and we live a good life here. We enjoy our country. We have children. So I'm saying this even though there are still challenges, including people who distort history. We see genocide deniers who are still intent to kill the remaining Tutsis. They didn't kill you all. You survived. But those people are still determined to kill you. They are doing that very same thing in the Congo. It's still a problem. They're still spreading hatred. There are some even inside the country, but there is even more outside the country. Somebody just said it here. We see that too. But what we do is that we are determined to break this silence. And this is the pact. This is a social contract between us and the Nghotanyi. They brought us back home, and we need to be grateful. So we, the youth, we know the truth. We should fight that fight over Twitter and everywhere and tell the truth. I started an association because I had noticed that there was a problem, and that association will help me and others to condemn genocide and its ideology, the ideology of hatred. So let's join hands. I'm talking to the youth to do what we can. And let's work together to fight that fight. Thank you very much.
I would like to come back to the panel as we conclude with. On a plusieurs questions.
We have so many questions. So when you have an opportunity or you want to answer a question, can you also share with us, your perspective? Because we have so many changes, in terms of, relations between France and Rwanda. So you can tell us now, so that we can have your perspective, and you can answer the question. Then you can also share the perspective, especially, towards the young people. What is your message to the young people? Thank you. I'm going to be very short. I understand that you feel frustrated. Of course, we do not discuss with the deniers, but we can do something. But I believe that Maybe I did not express very well what I wanted to say. You know, denial is a tree whose major root is racism. So we can we need to attack racism. But when we talk, you know, when you talk, actually when you fight deniers and you don't fight against racism, actually you do have a job. So, you know, I'm shocked by this idea of the culture of silence. I remember I was investigating Father Munyeshaka Wenceslas, and I interviewed a young Tutsi woman and her two girls, and as she said, no, I need to request I need to request I need to ask Munyeshaka to, because Munyashaka called me, he threatened me. So I have another witness who did a very good witness, but he said, no, Munyashaka is here in Rwanda. That is not the culture of silence. That is the culture of impunity for people who are refugees in France. And this is really a scandal. Now, regarding the, that idea, the pain of the Tutsis, we understand it is legitimate, but it is not the right way. You need to show that your suffering is universal. It is universal because it is the suffering from racism. We need to find a solution to that suffering. Well, you know, maybe we need to fight against racism. You know, we need to join hands and fight racism, because everybody understands what is racism. You know, people may say, "What is Rwanda?" But we need to come up with this universal message to fight against racism, because this is something which is very dear to my heart. Now, the issue of truth. We are going to do some philosophy. I'm not a philosopher, but I think we need to do something about it. What is the truth? We journalists, we think that it is a value. Some other people think that it is something. It's a challenge. Well, that is actually political way of expressing, truth. Those some people think that the truth exists, and we believe that it has to be defended as such. But we are faced with a true issue. People follow their belief, but they don't follow the truth. Therefore, there is a fight we need to wage. People call it the war of information. I don't like that word because as a journalist, because that is actually what is happening. But that war of information has to be waged, and I'm going to shock some people to tell you that it has been lost. It has been lost. When we look at, the propaganda in the DRC against the Tutsis, against Rwanda, including in media that we used to think that are serious. Let me give you an article of Le Monde 1 week ago. It's an interview with Felix Tshisekedi. I quote, "In Congo, 10 million dead and zero sanctions." And the subtitle, "The president of the DRC denounces the aggression of Rwanda in the eastern part of the DRC." That is the propaganda of Onana, that he said that 10 million that were 10 million dead caused by Rwanda. That is not acceptable. Why? Why is it written? Because it is written by a machinery of propaganda. I don't know how much money President Tshisekedi gives those people. We know their names, we know their methods. So there's no single Western journalist who can do their job in the DRC without being threatened or maybe imprisoned. So that's where we have the terror. That is in the DRC, not in Rwanda. myself, I published. I remember I published an interview with Munyamulenge a few weeks ago, and somebody threatened me. So I think that this is the war of information. It is there. We need to wage it, and we need to use all the necessary means. Thank you. What is your message to the young people and the humanity? In short, uh, the last word. What is? I understand the suffering that you have against from the deniers. Well, it is, you can look at Mr. Onana, RTLM, and Mr. Onana. Don't he's the propaganda maker of Vedrin. During the last uh, conference of Mr. Vedrin, Onana was one of the invited guests. So, you know, there are still many people who think that they can go up to the end, that they can finish the job. Mr. Onana, uh, uh, Ferdinand Aimana Baragwiza, he's the same as those genocide perpetrators.
Andrew, Dele, Bubakar, and Yolande with your last words, the messages you've like to let the people that are here with today. Andrew, starting with you. So very concisely, please. You know, we are approaching the end of the conference. Yeah.
Yeah, very concisely is really to reiterate what Jean-Francois has said. Silence is the enemy of the truth. And we need to keep talking and keep writing and keep thinking and keep praying, because the world at the minute is a very, very dangerous place. On top of the horrendous media of RTLM of 94, we now have social media, Truth Social, as one particular site is called, where there is no truth. And it is more dangerous for that reason. So we need to fight for that truth and get the truth out there, and not sit back and not be untold, really. And that starts at the schools. It starts at every level of society. You know, every time you read something in the paper from Jean-Francois or in the New Times or the Kinyarwanda publications or on YouTube or whatever, every time you're making that hit, you're reading it, you're responding to it, you're commenting on it, you are keeping alive the truth. And that's what we need to do.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. Dele?
Well, the one thing that continues to amaze me in a really beautiful way is to constantly in my mind, and I cannot help it, compare Rwanda that I came to in May 1994 to the Rwanda that I'm in today. And I've been doing that comparison almost every year, every couple of years, every 5 years or so over the past 30 years. And I think that you've already won. Don't forget that. This country is showing the world how to do so many things well. There is, to me, it's inarguable that this is the best run country on the African continent. You make things go a lot farther than most other places. Women are in charge of everything in Rwanda, and in fact, I think women are in a bit of a danger, and we may need some help in order to get a word in Rwanda today. Rwanda has upended the notions of which gender is best positioned to do the most complex and difficult tasks. And above all, I am absolutely impressed with the young people that I've continuously engaged with in this country, who have far more serious, far more significant responsibility in the affairs of their country than almost any other country I've ever seen on earth. They're confident, they're bright, they seem committed to me, and they just make me happy. I think I should spend more time in Rwanda so maybe I can get some of their youthful elixir. This country is doing what it needs to do in order to flourish and to protect its future and to build towards it. And so I don't feel that you should spend too much time about the things that prove distracting. Because as the eminent South African jurist Albie Sachs put it, the soft vengeance of those who have survived a horrific event is in succeeding against the odds, and you're already doing that. So I don't want you to leave this all thinking that there is some kind of siege that is descending on Rwanda, because that's not what I feel here. I feel liberated when I come here. I feel energized, and I'm very proud of, personally, not as a journalist, but as a human being, very proud of the kind of strides that have been made in this country. That's my own takeaway.
Thank you, Dele, for the positive energy. Boubacar, à votre tour, un dernier mot pour la fin.
There have been quite a number of interventions, but I'm going to focus on how in Senegal and other African countries that I know, how they see this country. Everyone has said it. When it happened, the African people in general were not aware of what was happening, maybe due to a lack of information. But there was a summit of the African Union in June 1994 in Tunisia. And on the agenda, there was nothing about what was happening. And Rwanda was represented by the outgoing regime. And during this African Union summit, Mandela said, if we don't do anything to protect the Tutsi victims in Rwanda, history will remember and hold this against us. And me, Nelson Mandela, elected president of South Africa, I am going to send troops to Rwanda. There was a French politician who was present during the summit. And when the French government heard that the South Africa was going to send troops, they said no way. And that is how the French government set up Opération Turquoise. We will do it ourselves. We'll set up Opération Turquoise, and we all know what happened after that. The genocide happened. There was the Eastern Congo. And that was after I passed through Rwanda. I was about to publish my book, and we tried to educate people. And when I talk with people, I have the impression that they're not really interested in what happened. So maybe we should adopt a different approach and say, well, maybe Rwanda actually did serve as an example. In Côte d'Ivoire, when things were really heating up and things were going to explode, I remember people referring to Rwanda and say, remember what happened in Rwanda? And I heard people on the radio, there were a lot of tensions at that time. In Rwanda too, that's how it started. It started from nothing. So the lesson is there. And today, when we say Rwanda, it's a good thing that the narrative is focused on the successes of the country, and people have talked about this. So people love this country. My children want to come to Rwanda, their friends. So it's this thing, this narrative so the history of Rwanda is not only about the genocide, about corpses, about massacres, genocide. It's about a clean country. It's about a man who inspires respect, where corruption does not eat up the country. And at the same time, the same people who admire the country, when you talk about the genocide, it's like they don't want to listen. They don't make the link between, that's what you just said, and it's very important. People like nice stories. They don't make the link of where Rwanda came from, what gave it the country this energy to work on itself and to show the world that they have a positive image. A positive image does not understand that people understand. We have tried to, everybody does what they can. In Senegal, there is the La Place du Souvenir Africain, and there is a section. It's thanks to the work of the Rwandan embassy. There is a section in that location that is dedicated to the victims of the genocide in Rwanda. But Selwyn Starr, a friend of mine, when we tried to organize a week of cinema projections, documentary, well, you know, students come because there's something to see, but they're not interested. I would conclude by saying, and sorry for having been long, I would like to conclude there is this Afro pessimism, the nice stories that people want to hear. Behind that, there is what we call Afro pessimism, and I think we should also work on that. It is this tendency to self denigrate ourselves that has the idea that being African, we are always the worst. We love blood. You know, the the racist and the Afro pessimists spend the night in the same bed. The, it is the racism that is oriented to us. And if there are massacres in Rwanda, Afro pessimism will think, well, there's nothing new there. Rwanda is Africa, people kill each other. Why would we focus on that? This has been going on for a very long time. It's absurd, it's stupid, but it is this with this stupidity that people function. And I insist, look at what's happening in Congo. It's the same thing. Yeah, this is why your work is important in deconstructing what is happening. Yolande, I'm sorry, but I can't give you more time. So if you could maybe give us your closing statement. What is your message to the youth? I'm going to try and use 10 sentences. I would like to say that we should not despair as Rwandans, as Africans. We shouldn't despair. A genocide is the worst. Is the worst thing. It's an act of destruction. It destroys the victims, the perpetrators, generations. And this is why, until today, there are people there's still a denial about the Shoah, about the Armenian genocide. So we have to continue working. And let's not forget that the genocide deniers are those who use genocide to for their own interest. those people who are the political opponents, to the government use the genocide. If I give an example of Victoire Ingabire, my children, if I can say something here, the genocide against the Tutsi is your history, the history of your children, your your generation. Rwanda is your mother. Without a Rwanda, you are nothing. We have to work on that. Thank you very much. Thank you.